Picture this. Your name was Eric. You were 15 when Viking ships appeared near your English village in 93. Just hours ago, you were fixing nets with your father, dreaming of sailing far away. Now your hands are tied as you're pushed into a Norse hall that smells of smoke, sour beer, and something worse. Something that twists your gut with fear. The thick smoke burns your nose as shadows dance on carved dragon heads that laugh at your terror. Your bare feet slip on mead-soaked planks, while warriors grab your torn clothes. Behind you, some prisoners cry softly, but the older captives stay quiet. Their empty eyes say they know what's coming. You don't. Not yet. The chief stands from his fancy chair, his beard woven with gold rings stolen from your dead neighbors. He points at you, speaking Norse words you don't know but feel in your bones. The hall explodes with cheers as hands grab you from all sides. You realize this isn't about money or even slavery. This is much darker. What happens next is just one night in a 300-year system of sexual terror that broke hundreds of thousands like you. These weren't random war crimes, but planned weapons of fear that helped Vikings conquer through pure horror. You think Vikings were about brave adventure. History books leave out the truth. Behind every raid was a machine designed to crush people in the most personal ways. What happened in halls like this scared whole kingdoms into surrender. The firelight shows faces eager for the show. Everyone here, from old warriors to watching kids, thinks what's about to happen to you is good fun. They've come for rituals that will haunt you forever. One thing they'll do to Eric was so cruel that even tough fighters would beg to die first. Between 700 and 1100 AD, Vikings built Europe's worst system of sexual terror. This wasn't just cruel men, it was a culture where whole towns broke people for power, money, and religion. Digs at places like Birka and Hedeby show special buildings made to shame prisoners. Bones tell of sexual violence against every age. These weren't battle sites, they were human processing factories. Recent discoveries have forced historians to confront uncomfortable truths about Viking expansion. The scale becomes clear when you examine trade records from major Viking ports. Conservative estimates suggest that during peak raiding years, over 40,000 people annually were taken captive across Europe. Most faced immediate execution or forced labor, but roughly 15% were reserved for special treatment designed to terrorize enemy populations into submission without costly warfare. What made Norse practices particularly effective was their integration with law, religion, and economics. The Gulating law specifically protected warriors' rights to treat captives however they wished, while offering victims no legal recourse. Religious texts portrayed gods who engaged in various forms of sexual violence, making such behavior divinely inspired rather than criminal. Foreign chroniclers struggled to describe what they witnessed in Viking territories. A Frankish monk writing in AD 51 reported rituals that made veteran soldiers refuse to enter captured settlements. These weren't isolated incidents, but standard procedures that accompanied every successful raid, turning military conquest into psychological warfare. The economic dimension reveals systematic organization that rivals modern trafficking operations. Viking merchants developed specialized markets for human cargo with detailed pricing structures based on age, appearance, and origin. Account ledgers from Bergen show that intimate slaves commanded higher prices than skilled craftsmen, reflecting their perceived value to Norse society. Archaeological analysis of Viking settlements shows how thoroughly violence shaped daily life. Children grew up watching public degradation as entertainment. Women learned to expect systematic abuse as normal household management. And men competed to devise creative methods of breaking human spirits. 3 centuries of institutionalized terror created a culture where empathy was weakness and cruelty demonstrated divine favor. The psychological profiles of Viking communities show classic markers of societies built on systematic abuse, high rates of domestic violence, casual cruelty toward animals and dependents, and inability to form stable alliances with neighboring peoples, all stemming from cultural foundations that celebrated terror as proof of social status and religious devotion. DNA evidence from medieval Scandinavian populations reveals massive influxes of foreign genetic material consistent with systematic forced breeding programs. Maternal lineages show patterns of reproductive coercion that support saga accounts of multi-generational systems operating across the Norse world for centuries. Christian missionaries who encountered Viking sexual practices often abandoned conversion efforts entirely, reporting back to Rome that these peoples were beyond salvation due to behaviors too horrific for civilized minds to comprehend. Some missionary accounts were destroyed by church authorities who deemed them too disturbing for preservation in holy archives. The sophisticated legal framework supporting sexual violence demonstrates how completely Norse society had institutionalized human degradation. The law codes didn't just permit abuse, but specified procedures for handling human property, resolving disputes over access rights, and punishing resistance with escalating brutality. But understanding the systematic nature of Norse intimate terror tells only part of the story. The real horror lies in what happened to individuals like Eric, whose suffering was carefully designed to send messages that would echo across medieval Europe long after the last longship returned home. Modern attempts to romanticize Viking culture as brave exploration and noble warfare represent historical denial that dishonors countless victims like Eric, whose broken bodies built the foundation of Norse expansion. These weren't heroes seeking adventure, but predators who refined human suffering into an art form that funded their civilization through systematic terror. The evidence scattered across Scandinavian archaeological sites tells the true story of Viking success. It wasn't superior seamanship or warrior courage that made expansion possible, but a willingness to inflict violence so extreme that enemies would surrender entire territories rather than risk their populations experiencing what was about to happen to Eric in that longhouse. The moment the Viking raiders dragged Eric and the other captives into that longhouse, a systematic process began that was designed to destroy human identity before resistance could take root. What Eric witnessed in that smoky hall was just the opening ceremony of a ritual degradation program that could last for months and was refined through centuries of practice. The initial sorting happened immediately. Raiders separated prisoners into categories based on age, physical condition, and perceived social value. Eric, young and unmarked by hard labor, was marked for use. The elderly villagers faced immediate execution as burdens not worth feeding through winter months. The strong men were designated for hard labor in distant settlements. But Eric faced something far worse than death or slavery. He was stripped naked before the entire raiding party and subjected to public examination that served multiple psychological functions. Vikings were assessing his physical condition, checking for diseases, and beginning the mental destruction that would make future resistance impossible. The examination process was deliberately designed to shatter dignity. Eric was forced into degrading positions while warriors inspected his body like livestock being evaluated for market value. When he tried to cover himself, iron hands yanked his arms away. The message was clear from the first moment: your body belongs to us now. Next came the marking ritual. A red-hot iron seared into Eric's shoulder, branding him with a symbol indicating his new status in Norse society. The pain was excruciating, but worse was the psychological mess. This mark wasn't just identification, but a permanent reminder that he was no longer Eric the fisherman's son, but property of his Norse captors. The warriors laughed as Eric screamed, passing around drinking horns filled with ale while his flesh sizzled. Children in the hall watched with the same casual interest they'd show for any other household chore. To them, this was normal entertainment, as routine as sharpening weapons or mending nets. Transport to the permanent settlement involved additional layers of systematic humiliation. Eric was chained to other captives in positions that maximized discomfort, while allowing raiders easy access for continued abuse. During the 3-week journey north, he learned quickly that compliance might reduce suffering, but would never eliminate it entirely. Upon arrival at the Viking settlement, Eric faced what survivors later described as the welcome ceremony. This community ritual involved every resident and established the social order that would govern his existence. Men, women, and children participated in activities designed to demonstrate his complete powerlessness and integration into Norse society as property rather than a person. The psychological warfare was sophisticated and devastatingly effective. Eric was required to participate in his own degradation, forced to thank his captors for basic necessities like moldy bread and fouled water. He learned that displaying emotion or mentioning his former life would trigger punishments that made his current suffering seem mild by comparison. Religious justification made this process even more psychologically damaging. The degradation of Eric and other captives was framed as offerings to gods who demanded human suffering as proof of devotion. Before we dive into the most disturbing part, subscribe and hit that like button if you can handle what's coming next, and definitely comment below to let me know where you're listening from. I think it's incredible that people across the world are connected by the same curiosity about the darkest parts of human history. Once the initial breaking process was complete, Eric entered the thrall system, a form of human ownership that went far beyond simple slavery to encompass complete control over every aspect of existence. This wasn't just about forced labor, but about treating Eric as property available for any purpose his owner desired. Eric lived in specialized quarters designed to maximize control while providing convenient access for his owner and associates. Archaeological excavations have revealed these buildings featured restraint systems, observation points, communal areas where multiple captives like Eric could be housed together to prevent individual relationships from forming that might threaten owner authority. His daily routine involved constant availability to his master Bjorn and anyone Bjorn chose to grant access. This could include honored guests, business partners, reward systems for loyal followers. Eric learned that his body was currency in a social economy where intimate access demonstrated status and sealed agreements between free Norse citizens. The physical toll on Eric's body was devastating and intentional. Within months, his once healthy frame became gaunt from irregular feeding and constant stress. Bruises covered his arms and back from daily beatings designed to maintain submission. Internal injuries from repeated violations left him in constant pain, but unable to seek relief. The legal framework surrounding Eric's ownership was comprehensive and ruthless. Law codes specified exactly how human property like him could be treated, appropriate punishments for resistance, how disputes over access rights should be resolved. These weren't informal arrangements, but legally protected systems of human exploitation backed by community enforcement. Most disturbing was how Eric's abuse became normalized within Bjorn's household. Free women learned to accept his presence as routine aspects of domestic management, often participating in his punishment or training. Bjorn's children grew up witnessing systematic abuse as normal household operations, sometimes using Eric for their own entertainment. The economic dimensions created additional layers of horror for Eric. He was valuable property that could be bought, sold, traded, used as collateral for debts. His market value fluctuated based on his appearance and condition, with detailed accounting systems tracking his worth like livestock or farm equipment. The psychological toll was devastating and intentionally designed to create permanent damage. Eric was systematically prevented from forming emotional bonds with other thralls, maintaining hope for rescue. When he began forming a friendship with another English captive, they were separated, and the other boy was sold to a settlement 3 days' journey away. Eric was rotated between different masters to prevent adaptation, isolated from potential allies, subjected to unpredictable punishment schedules designed to create learned helplessness. Some days brought relative peace, others brought hours of abuse for no discernible reason. By his second winter in captivity, Eric had become what the Vikings considered a successful thrall. He had completely internalized his degradation, responded to summons without resistance, helped train new captives in submission techniques. The boy who had once dreamed of adventure was gone, replaced by a broken shell who existed only to serve his captor's desires. The horror extended beyond individual ownership into community rituals involving entire populations in systematic human degradation. Erik wasn't just Bjorn's property, but community entertainment available for festivals, religious ceremonies, social bonding through shared participation in his suffering. The concept of Neith involved ritual humiliation designed to permanently destroy enemies' honor. During these ceremonies, Erik would be publicly displayed as an example of Viking authorities' consequences, subjected to degradation witnessed by entire settlements. Archaeological evidence from sites like Gamla Uppsala suggests some Norse communities constructed specialized amphitheaters for public humiliation. Erik was forced to perform in structures accommodating hundreds, remain in degrading positions for extended periods, serve as entertainment while communities celebrated around him. The religious dimensions of community-sanctioned violence were particularly disturbing in their systematic organization. During fertility rituals dedicated to gods like Frey and Freya, Erik was forced to participate in ceremonies designed to ensure good harvests and successful raids. These religious obligations transformed his suffering from mere entertainment into sacred duty. Seasonal festivals incorporated Erik's abuse as communal entertainment. During winter solstice celebrations, warriors competed to devise increasingly creative humiliations. Events became family-friendly gatherings where children learned to celebrate suffering. The entire community interpreted this violence as earning divine favor. The legal system reinforced participation through requirements that free citizens must witness certain rituals to maintain social standing. Empathy was not just discouraged but legally prohibited. Each generation escalated cruelty to prove their worth. By his third year in captivity, Erik had become a permanent fixture at community gatherings. A body covered in scars from public ceremonies. A spirit so broken he performed any demanded act without hesitation. The village children who had watched his initial breaking were now young adults who used him for their own entertainment, perpetuated cycles of abuse across generations, competed to invent new degradations. The final tragedy was the complete erasure of Erik's identity. Could no longer remember his parents' faces. His native English words came slowly, replaced by Norse commands. The boy who dreamed of adventure became a living warning of Viking conquest. When Erik finally died during his fourth winter, worn out by years of systematic abuse, his death was noted only in Bjorn's account books as a loss of property worth 12 silver pieces. No grave marked his passing. No prayers were said for his soul. He simply disappeared, another forgotten victim of a system that had refined human suffering into cultural tradition. The systematic concealment of Viking intimate practices began with medieval Christian chroniclers, who couldn't reconcile their conversion narratives with the documented reality of Norse behavior. When Icelandic saga writers recorded Viking history in the 12th–13th centuries, church pressures forced them to sanitize accounts of practices deemed incompatible with Christian values. Modern parallels. The same psychological mechanisms that enabled Viking communities to participate in systematic abuse continue today wherever power structures protect perpetrators. Victims are silenced. Degradation becomes normalized. Erik was 15 when he died in that northern settlement, his body finally giving out after 4 years of abuse that erased his humanity. He represents thousands of unknown victims whose suffering built Viking expansion across Europe. 3 disturbing truths. Religious corruption. Erik's torture shows how easily spiritual beliefs sanctify cruelty when gods demand suffering as devotion. Economic normalization. Viking accounting systems treating humans as livestock prove trafficking becomes institutionalized when profitable. Public celebration. Unlike shame-based cruelty, Erik's degradation was proud community entertainment that defined cultural identity. The romanticized Viking image represents historical denial. The text protects modern sensibilities, dishonors victims like Erik, covers up violence shaping European history. Final warning. Eric's story reminds us that human dignity isn't civilization's default, but must be actively protected by confronting uncomfortable truths about unchecked power and celebrated cruelty. Next time you see glamorized Vikings in media, remember the real price of Norse expansion, the systems that made suffering routine, the voices history tried to erase.